Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. Oil from a sunken rig in the Gulf of Mexico has now reached the Louisiana coastline. Much more is on the way, along with bad weather. And the military is now involved in the effort to head off an environmental disaster, or at least try to. We have Fox team coverage. Senior White House correspondent Major Garrett reports on the administration's response. Correspondent Jonathan Siri looks at the economic impact on the fishing and tourism industries. But we begin with correspondent Chris Gutierrez, live in Venice, Louisiana, the staging area for that cleanup effort. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening to you, Brett. Mother Nature is not cooperating with the massive cleanup effort underway off the coast here in Louisiana. Strong winds and a rising tide are pushing oily water up and over the floating barriers that were set up to protect the shoreline. A thin oil sheen is already washing ashore in areas only accessible by boat. The concern is if the oil flowing into the Gulf isn't stopped, it could push into marshy inlets, ponds, and lakes, not just here in Louisiana, but all the way over to Florida. Here's an image of the spill taken from space. NASA satellites clearly show this spill is growing, and the federal government is now pressing BP, the company that was leasing the sunken rig, to step up efforts to cap the well.
We continue to urge BP to leverage additional assets to help lead the response in this effort, because it is clear that after several unsuccessful attempts to secure the source of the leak, it is time for BP to supplement their current mobilization as the slick of oil moves toward shore.
Today, crews working to clean up the oil slick plucked this bird from the Gulf. It was covered in oil. Wildlife experts washed it and plan to set it free, but not until the oil leak is contained. This bird may be the first of many affected by this spill. In fact, more than 400 species of wildlife have already been identified as potentially being in harm's way. Brett, back to you.
Chris Gutierrez, live in Louisiana. Chris, thanks. The spill could have effects that go far beyond the Louisiana coastline. Correspondent Jonathan Siri looks at that part of the story from Dauphin Island, Alabama.
Tracking the oil spill's effect on wildlife, the Dauphin Island Sea Lab is sending research teams into some of the most environmentally fragile areas to take samples. Shallow water habitats for oysters, shrimp, and spawning fish are the biggest concern for marine biologist George Crozier.
This is the Fertile Crescent. I mean, this is a good percentage of the production in the Gulf of Mexico is east of the Mississippi River. And I'm not equipped to tell you it's going to be worth this many dollars, but if we're looking at a decade of impact with reduced production, I think that's my long-term concern.
The oil spill could have a huge impact on commercial fishing interests and tourism. Randy Boggs owns a small fishing charter company in Orange Beach.
Tourism, of course, is always paramount in my business. We don't want to see any oil on the beaches.
Marine biologists say beaches are relatively easy to clean, and controlled burns could remove oil from marshes, but not so for oyster habitat.
That's our concern. If it gets in oyster reefs and grass beds, terribly productive areas, you don't exactly run a vacuum cleaner over it. The grass beds are particularly fragile in our part of the world, so even trying to clean it would probably destroy them.
Already, a Mississippi seafood company has filed a federal class action lawsuit against British Petroleum and other companies involved with that sunken oil rig, seeking at least $5 million in compensatory damages. Meanwhile, BP officials say they will honor all legitimate claims of damages arising from this oil spill. Brett?
Okay, Jonathan, thank you. President Obama today ordered that no new offshore drilling leases be issued unless rigs have new safeguards to prevent a repeat of what is happening now in the Gulf. And senior White House correspondent Major Garrett reports the administration is bristling at comparisons to a previous disaster in the same region.
For the second straight day, President Obama grafted remarks on the Gulf Coast oil slick disaster onto a prepared speech on another topic. Today was economic growth, something now imperiled as Gulf Coast states fear a devastating blow to their seasonal tourism and fishing industries. The first move delaying any new offshore oil and natural gas leases.
I continue to believe that domestic oil production is an important part of our overall strategy for energy security. But I've always said it must be done responsibly for the safety of our workers and our environment.
As the damaged exploratory well continued to pump an estimated 200,000 gallons of oil into the Gulf per day, the White House pumped out statistics on the federal response, including this rare blog post from White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs. The president said the crisis is worsening. As it does, the Gulf Coast, having just recently recovered from Katrina, feels a sense of helplessness as the slick, buffeted by high seas, creeps ever closer. During the campaign, candidate Obama said this about Katrina.
The words never again cannot be another empty phrase.
The context was levees around New Orleans, but the broader promise was clear. Mr. Obama's team dismisses any suggestion this catastrophe could become Mr. Obama's Katrina. Coast Guard Commandant Thad Allen took the question head on.
Well, to quote a politician in the past, I was at Katrina and this is no Katrina. Okay, the only thing that's similar is we've had a massive failure of critical infrastructure. One were levees, this is a wellhead on the ocean floor. After that, I don't think there's any comparison.
And you are satisfied with the federal response from minute one to where we are now?
Not only am I satisfied, I'm accountable. I'm the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and we've been there from the start saving people's lives.
Environmentalists in general agreed.
The immediate response to stop the leak, I think, was handled well. I do think that the president focused his top brass's attention on it a bit late, though.
The Coast Guard was on scene soon after the exploratory rig Deepwater Horizon exploded. 11 rig workers are still missing and presumed dead. Early efforts to cap the well failed, and the company operating the well, BP, underestimated the quantity of oil leaking 5,000 feet beneath the ocean surface.
They initially thought it was 1,000 barrels a day, partly because it's like a hose that's twisted. So I think the estimate was that less was coming out than you would anticipate if the hose had not been twisted.
Commandant Allen also says there's two ways to mark time in this disaster. 3 days for the catastrophic fire, which was then put out, and the rescue operation, and then back from today, 5 days of the oil leak and measuring, first inexpertly, now a little bit more confidently, how much oil is actually leaking into the Gulf. Brett?
Be a lot of looking into this. Major Garrett live on the North Lawn. Major, thanks. Dan Springer will look back at the worst ever oil disaster in the U.S., the 1989 Exxon Valdez spill off the coast of Alaska, and see what that area looks like today. That's coming up at the bottom of the